Jake Morrison woke up at 5 in the morning, like he did every day. He lived alone on his farm in Nebraska with his dog Rex, a black and white border collie who never left his side. Jake was 34 years old and had been running the farm for 10 years since his father died. The farm was small, but it made enough money to keep Jake happy. He grew corn and soybeans on the land his grandfather had bought many years ago. That morning felt different from the start. The air was too quiet, and even Rex seemed nervous, walking close to Jake's legs as they went outside to check the crops. Jake looked up at the sky and saw dark clouds moving in a strange way. The clouds were too big and moved too fast to be normal weather. He stood in his cornfield watching the sky change color from blue to gray to black dot. Then Jake saw something that made his heart stop. The dark shapes in the sky were not clouds at all. They were huge ships made of metal and glass that caught the morning light like diamonds. The ships were bigger than anything Jake had ever seen, bigger than football stadiums, floating in the air without making any sound. Rex started barking and running in circles. Jake could only stand and watch as more ships appeared in the sky. Soon there were hundreds of them covering the entire sky above his farm and stretching to the horizon in every direction. The ships began to land in the fields around his farm, crushing crops and trees under their massive weight. Jake ran back to his house and turned on the television. Every channel showed the same thing happening all over the world. The ships had arrived everywhere at the same time. The news people were calling it an alien invasion, but no one knew what the aliens wanted or where they came from. Within 3 hours, every government on Earth had surrendered. The aliens had weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds. No human military could fight against such power. Jake watched on television as world leaders gave speeches telling people to stay calm and follow whatever orders the aliens gave. Jake did not have to wait long to meet the aliens himself. A smaller ship landed right in front of his house, crushing his vegetable garden. The ship opened and 3 tall figures walked out. They looked like giant insects made of crystal and metal. They stood 8 feet tall and had 4 arms each. Their skin looked like broken glass that reflected rainbows in the sunlight. Their eyes were huge and had many parts like the eyes of a fly. The tallest alien walked up to Jake. When it spoke, a small device on its chest made the sounds into English words that Jake could understand. The alien said its name was Commander Vexthara and that Jake's farm now belonged to the Zephyrian Empire. Commander Vexthara told Jake that Earth was now part of their empire and that all farms had to produce much more food than before. Jake's farm had to make 10 times more corn and soybeans than it made now. The aliens needed the extra food to feed their people who were coming to live on Earth. Jake looked at his fields and shook his head. He told the commander that what she wanted was impossible. His farm was already producing as much as the soil could handle. To make 10 times more food would require different seeds, different machines, and different chemicals. Even then, Jake was not sure it could be done. Commander Vexthara's eyes flashed with anger. She told Jake that failure was not acceptable. Every farm on Earth had 6 months to meet the new quotas. Farms that failed would be taken away from their owners. The humans who failed would be sent to work in factories in the cities, making things for the Zephyrian Empire. The commander and her soldiers got back in their ship and flew away, leaving Jake standing alone in his crushed garden. Rex came and sat next to him, whining softly. Jake looked out at his fields, trying to figure out how he could possibly grow 10 times more food in 6 months. As the sun set that evening, Jake sat on his porch with Rex at his feet. He could see the alien ships in the distance, their lights blinking in the darkness. Jake had always been good at solving problems on his farm, but this problem seemed impossible. He had 6 months to do something that had never been done before. or he would lose everything his family had built over 3 generations. Jake went to bed that night knowing that his quiet life as a simple farmer was over. Tomorrow he would have to start figuring out how to save his farm and maybe even his life. He did not know that the answer was already waiting for him, hidden in his own barn where it had been sleeping for almost 80 years. Jake spent the first month after the aliens arrived trying to figure out how to meet their impossible demands. He worked from sunrise to sunset, calculating and recalculating how much food his farm could produce. No matter how he did the math, the answer was always the same. His farm could not make 10 times more food with normal farming methods. Jake tried everything he could think of. He called agricultural experts at the university, but they had no answers. He looked into buying new machines and better seeds, but he did not have enough money. Even if he had all the money in the world, the experts told him that no farm could increase production by that much without destroying the soil completely. His neighbor, Carl Peterson, gave up after 3 weeks. Carl sold his farm to the aliens for almost nothing and moved to the city to work in one of their factories. Before he left, Carl stopped by Jake's house to say goodbye. Carl looked tired and defeated as he sat at Jake's kitchen table drinking coffee. He told Jake that he was smart to give up too. Carl said the aliens were offering jobs in their factories to farmers who admitted they could not meet the quotas. The work was hard, but at least they would not be killed for failing. Jake thanked Carl for the advice, but said he was not ready to give up yet. After Carl left, Jake sat alone in his kitchen with Rex sleeping at his feet. He knew he was probably being foolish, but something inside him refused to quit. This farm was all he had left of his family, and he was not ready to lose it without a fight. That weekend, Jake decided to clean out his grandfather's old barn. He had been putting off the job for years because the barn was full of old equipment and papers that had been gathering dust since his grandfather died. Jake thought maybe he could find some old machinery that he could fix and use to improve his farming. The barn was darker and dustier than Jake remembered. He spent hours moving old plows and tractors that had not run in decades. Rex helped by chasing mice that ran out from under the equipment. In the back corner of the barn, behind a broken hay baler, Jake found a wooden chest that he had never seen before. The chest was locked, but the old metal was rusty enough that Jake could break it open with a hammer. Inside the chest he found dozens of old books and papers tied together with string. Most of the papers were covered in dust, and some were so old that they fell apart when Jake tried to pick them up. Jake carried the papers into his house and spread them out on his kitchen table. As he looked through them, he realized they were not his grandfather's papers at all. They belonged to his great-grandfather, Dr. William Morrison, who had been a scientist before he became a farmer. The papers were full of notes about something called symbiotic soil cultivation. Jake had never heard of this before, but as he read the notes, he began to understand what his great-grandfather had been working on. Dr. Morrison had discovered a way to put special bacteria and fungi into soil to make plants grow much bigger and stronger. According to the notes, these tiny organisms would work together with the plant roots to share nutrients and water more efficiently. The plants would grow faster and produce more food while actually making the soil healthier instead of wearing it out like normal farming. Did Jake read through the night, trying to understand all the scientific terms and formulas? The more he read, the more excited he became. According to his great-grandfather's calculations, this symbiotic cultivation method could increase crop production by up to 800% without damaging the land. In the bottom of the chest, Jake found several glass containers filled with what looked like dried mud. The labels on the containers were written in his great-grandfather's handwriting and said they contained dormant cultures of the special organisms. D.L. Morrison had written detailed instructions for how to wake up the organisms and introduce them. To farm soil. Jake could hardly believe what he was reading. If his great-grandfather's research was correct, Jake might actually be able to meet the alien quotas. The notes were dated from the 1940s, which meant this incredible farming technology had been sitting in his barn for almost 80 years. Jake stayed up all night reading every page of his great-grandfather's research. By morning, he had a basic understanding of how the symbiotic cultivation system worked. The process was complex, but not impossible. It would require careful preparation and exact timing, but Jake thought he could do it. The next morning, Jake started his first test. He followed his great-grandfather's instructions exactly, mixing the dormant organisms with water and nutrients in exactly the right amounts. He prepared a small plot of soil behind his house and introduced the organisms according to the detailed procedures in the notes. Then Jake planted corn seeds in the treated soil and waited. According to the research, he should see results within 2 weeks if the process worked correctly. Jake had never wanted anything to work as much as he wanted this to work. If his great-grandfather's science was real, it might be the miracle Jake needed to save his farm and his life. Jake waited 2 weeks for his test plot to show results, and what he saw made him believe in miracles. The corn plants in the treated soil were twice as tall as normal corn plants should be at that stage. Their leaves were darker green and thicker than any corn Jake had ever grown. Even more amazing, the soil around the plants looked healthier and richer than it had before he planted anything. Jake dug up one of the corn plants to examine the roots. What he found made his hands shake with excitement. The roots were covered with a white fuzzy material that his great-grandfather's notes said was the symbiotic fungi. The roots were also much larger and more complex than normal corn roots, spreading out in patterns that Jake had never seen before. Jake ran more tests over the next month, trying the symbiotic cultivation on different parts of his farm. Every test showed the same incredible results. Plants grew bigger, stronger, and faster than should have been possible. The soil improved with each test, instead of being worn out by the farming. By the end of the second month, Jake knew that his great-grandfather's research was real and that it could save his farm. The problem was that Jake only had 4 months left to meet the alien quota. He would have to treat his entire farm with the symbiotic organisms and plant all his crops in time for harvest before the deadline. Jake spent every penny he had saved buying the materials he needed to scale up the symbiotic cultivation process. He worked 18 hours a day, preparing cultures of the organisms in big containers in his barn. Rex stayed by his side through all the long days and nights, bringing Jake food when he forgot to eat and barking when Jake fell asleep at his work. The process was more difficult than Jake had expected. Growing enough organisms to treat his entire farm required precise control of temperature, nutrients, and timing. Jake made mistakes that cost him time and materials he could not afford to lose. Several times he thought about giving up and accepting a job in one of the alien factories. What kept Jake going was a visit from his neighbor Maria Santos. Maria was a veterinarian who ran a small farm on the land next to Jake's property. She had heard rumors that Jake was working on something secret and came to see if he needed help. Jake was reluctant to tell Maria about his great-grandfather's research. He was afraid that if word got out about the symbiotic cultivation, the aliens might take the technology for themselves. But Maria was persistent, and eventually, Jake decided he needed help if he was going to succeed. When Jake showed Maria his great-grandfather's notes and the results from his test plots, Maria's scientific training helped her understand the research faster than Jake had. She immediately offered to help Jake prepare his farm for the symbiotic cultivation process. Maria worked with Jake every evening after finishing her veterinary practice. She helped him improve the process for growing the organisms and developing better methods for introducing them to the soil. With Maria's help, Jake was able to prepare his fields much faster than he could have done alone. The aliens conducted monthly inspections of all the farms in Jake's district. Commander Vexthara always arrived with a team of soldiers and scientists who measured crop growth and soil conditions. Each month, Jake worried that they would discover what he was doing before he was ready. During the third monthly inspection, Commander Vexthara seemed suspicious of Jake's confidence. Most farmers in the district were panicking as the deadline approached, but Jake remained calm and continued working in his fields every day. The commander's crystal eyes reflected Jake's image in broken patterns as she questioned him about his methods. Jake told the commander that he was trying new fertilizers and soil treatments, which was technically true. He did not mention the symbiotic organisms or his great-grandfather's research. Commander Vexthara ordered her scientists to take soil samples from Jake's fields, but the organisms were too small to detect with their scanning equipment. After the aliens left, Maria asked Jake if he thought they suspected anything. Jake said he was not sure, but that it did not matter anymore. He had already introduced the symbiotic organisms to most of his farm. In another month, he would plant his crops, and then there would be no hiding what he had done. Jake finished treating his soil just as spring planting season began. Following his great-grandfather's detailed instructions, he planted corn and soybeans across his entire farm. The seeds went into soil that was alive with billions of helpful organisms that would work with the plants to create something that had never been seen on Earth before. As Jake walked through his planted fields with Rex at his side, he felt a mixture of hope and terror. In 4 months, he would either produce the impossible harvest that would save his farm, or he would fail spectacularly and lose everything. Either way, there was no turning back now. Jake had committed everything he had to his great-grandfather's forgotten science, and soon the whole world would see if that science really worked. Jake's crops began showing extraordinary results within the first month of growing. His corn plants grew so fast that he could almost watch them get taller each day. By the second month, the corn stalks were already 8 feet tall when they should have been only 3 feet. The soybean plants were equally impressive, growing thick and bushy with more branches than Jake had ever seen on any plant. Commander Vexthara arrived for the 4th monthly inspection with a larger team than usual. She brought several alien scientists and soldiers who spread out across Jake's farm with scanning devices and soil testing equipment. The commander's crystal face showed no emotion, but Jake could tell she was confused by what she was seeing. The alien scientists took measurements of Jake's plants and compared them to normal growth charts. They spoke to each other in their own language, making clicking and buzzing sounds that their translation devices did not convert to English. Jake watched them work, trying to stay calm while his heart pounded in his chest. Dr. Kethmoran, the head alien scientist, approached Jake with a handheld device that beeped and flashed as he pointed it at the corn plants. The alien's 4 arms moved independently as he operated multiple instruments at once. His compound eyes focused on Jake with an intensity that made Jake want to step backward. Dr. Kethmoran told Jake that his plant growth rates were impossible according to all known agricultural science. He demanded to know what chemicals or technology Jake was using to achieve such results. The alien scientist's voice through the translator sounded angry and suspicious. Jake explained that he was using organic soil treatment methods that his family had developed over many generations. He showed the aliens his great-grandfather's old notes, though he was careful to only show them the basic farming sections and not the detailed scientific formulas. Jake said his great-grandfather had been experimenting with natural soil bacteria and fungi. The aliens took samples of everything they could find. They dug up soil from different parts of Jake's farm and took pieces of his plants for analysis. They even took samples of the water from Jake's well and the fertilizer from his barn. Commander Vexthara told Jake that they would analyze everything and return with questions. After the aliens left, Maria came over to help Jake prepare for what might be their final test. She had been monitoring the alien communication channels with a radio scanner and had heard them reporting unusual biological activity in Jake's soil. Maria warned Jake that the aliens were becoming very interested in his farming methods. Jake's crops continued to grow at an incredible pace. By the 5th month, his corn stalks were 15 feet tall, with multiple ears on each plant. The ears were larger and fuller than any corn Jake had ever seen, with kernels that seemed to glow with health and nutrition. His soybean plants were equally remarkable, covered with pods that hung in thick clusters. When harvest time finally arrived, Jake could barely believe what he was seeing. His mechanical harvester could barely handle the size and density of his crops. The corn ears were so heavy that some stalks bent under their weight. The soybean pods were packed so tightly that the harvester had to move slowly to avoid damaging the equipment. Jake worked around the clock to bring in his harvest before the alien deadline. Maria helped him operate the equipment while Rex ran alongside the machines, barking with excitement at all the activity. Neighbors from miles around came to watch the impossible harvest, standing at the edges of Jake's fields with amazement on their faces. The final numbers were beyond anything Jake had dared to hope for. His small farm had produced enough corn and soybeans to meet not just his own quota, but the quotas of 3 neighboring farms as well. He had exceeded the alien requirements by more than 300%, producing food that could feed thousands of people. Commander Vexthara arrived on the final day with her entire scientific team and a military escort. The aliens spent hours measuring and weighing Jake's harvest, checking their instruments repeatedly as if they could not believe their own readings. Dr. Kethmoran examined samples of Jake's crops under portable microscopes, his 4 arms moving frantically over his equipment. The commander's crystal face reflected the late afternoon sun as she stood in Jake's barn, surrounded by mountains of Va, corn and soybeans. She told Jake that his production levels were unprecedented in the history of the Zephyrian Empire. No farm anywhere in their galaxy had ever achieved such yields from such a small area of land. Jake simply nodded and said that the land had provided what was needed. He did not mention the months of careful preparation or the scientific breakthrough that had made it all possible. He just stood in his barn with Rex at his side, looking at the alien commander who had threatened to destroy his life 6 months earlier. Commander Vexthara informed Jake that his success had created a problem for the Zephyrian Empire. Other farms in the district had failed to meet their quotas, but Jake's surplus production was enough to make up for their shortfalls. The aliens now had more food than they had expected, and no explanation for how one human farmer had achieved the impossible. The commander told Jake that the Zephyrian High Command wanted to meet with him personally. They were offering him vast wealth and advanced technology in exchange for his farming secrets. Jake listened politely, but told the commander that he would need time to consider their offer. That night, Jake sat on his porch with Maria and Rex, looking out at his empty fields under the starlight. He had saved his farm and proven that his great-grandfather's science worked, but he knew that his real challenges were just beginning. The most powerful empire in the galaxy now wanted something that only he possessed, and Jake had to decide what to do with that power. Jake made a decision that would change the course of human history. Instead of keeping his great-grandfather's symbiotic cultivation methods secret or selling them to the highest bidder, he decided to share the knowledge freely with every farmer on Earth. Jake believed that the technology belonged to humanity, not to any individual or alien empire. Working with Maria, Jake established training programs for farmers across North America. They started small, inviting neighboring farmers to Jake's barn, where he demonstrated how to prepare the symbiotic organisms and treat soil for maximum production. Word spread quickly through farming communities as people saw the incredible results. For themselves, the first group of farmers to learn Jake's methods included people from 5 different states. They came to Nebraska expecting to learn about new fertilizers or planting techniques, but left with cultures of living organisms and knowledge that would transform their farms completely. Jake gave each farmer enough starter cultures to treat their entire properties and detailed instructions for maintaining the symbiotic systems. Within 3 months, farms across the Midwest were reporting production increases that seemed impossible to anyone who had not seen Jake's original results. Corn yields increased by an average of 600%, while soybean production increased by even more. The soil on these farms actually improved with each harvest, instead of being depleted like normal farmland. Jake and Maria traveled constantly, teaching farmers in different regions how to adapt the symbiotic cultivation methods to their local soil conditions and climate patterns. They discovered that the organisms Dr. Morrison had preserved were incredibly adaptable, working well in different types of soil and with many different crops. The Zephyrian authorities began to panic as human food production skyrocketed beyond all their projections. Commander Vexthara was reassigned to study human agricultural methods full-time, but her reports to the alien leadership only increased their confusion and concern. The aliens had conquered dozens of planets, but they had never encountered a species that could increase agricultural output so dramatically in such a short time. Jake received constant offers from the Zephyrian Empire for his agricultural secrets. They offered him leadership positions in their government, advanced alien technology, and enough wealth to buy entire planets. Jake politely declined every offer, explaining that he was not interested in personal gain from his great-grandfathers discoveries. The aliens could not understand Jake's motivations. In Zephyrian culture, scientific discoveries were tightly controlled by the government and used to maintain power over conquered populations. The idea that someone would freely share such valuable knowledge with their entire species was completely foreign to their way of thinking. Dr. Keth Morin visited Jake's farm regularly, trying to understand how the symbiotic cultivation system worked. The alien scientists took thousands of soil samples and plant specimens back to their laboratories for analysis, but their equipment could not fully decode the complex interactions between the organisms and the plant roots. Jake allowed the alien scientists to study his methods, but he did not help them understand the deeper principles behind the symbiotic cultivation. He shared basic information about soil preparation and organism cultivation, but kept the more advanced aspects of his great-grandfather's research for human farmers only. As more farms adopted the symbiotic cultivation methods, the effects on global food production became impossible to ignore. Countries that had struggled with food shortages for decades suddenly had massive surpluses. The price of grain and other staple foods dropped to almost nothing as supply far exceeded demand for the first time in human history. Jake established the Morrison Agricultural Foundation to coordinate the spread of symbiotic cultivation knowledge around the world. The foundation provided free training, starter cultures, and ongoing support to farmers on every continent. Maria became the foundation's chief scientist, developing new applications for the symbiotic organisms and training regional coordinators. Zephyrian Empire found itself in an increasingly difficult position. Their original justification for conquering Earth had been humanity's supposed inability to efficiently manage planetary resources. Now human farms were producing more food per acre than the most advanced agricultural worlds in the Zephyrian Empire. Reports from alien agricultural worlds revealed that Zephyrian farming methods were actually damaging their planet's ecosystems. Their industrial farming techniques had depleted soil nutrients and contaminated water supplies on dozens of worlds. Some Zephyrian planets were facing environmental collapse due to centuries of unsustainable agricultural practices. Commander, Vextaros reports to Emperor Zixandra painted a picture that threatened the foundation of Zephyrian civilization. Human agricultural technology was not just more productive than Zephyrian methods. It was actively healing damaged ecosystems while producing unprecedented yields. The implications were staggering for an empire built on the assumption of their fall. Own technological superiority. Jake continued his quiet work. Seemingly unaware of the chaos his decisions were causing in the highest levels of alien government. He traveled from farm to farm, teaching people how to work with the soil organisms and celebrating each success story with genuine enthusiasm. Rex accompanied him everywhere, becoming almost as famous as Jake among farming communities. The foundations. Work expanded to include research into new applications for symbiotic cultivation. Maria and her team discovered that the organisms could be adapted to work with fruit trees, vegetable gardens, and even indoor growing systems. They were developing methods to use symbiotic cultivation to restore damaged farmland and reclaim areas that had been considered too poor for agriculture. By the end of Jake's first year of teaching, more than 10,000 farms across 6 continents were using symbiotic cultivation methods. Food production on Earth had increased by an average of 400%, completely eliminating hunger in regions that had suffered from food shortages for generations. The quiet farmer from Nebraska had started a revolution that was reshaping the relationship between humanity and the alien and empire that had conquered them. 2 years after Jake first discovered his great-grandfather's research, the Zephyrian Empire faced a crisis that threatened their entire civilization. Human agricultural production had become so advanced that the aliens now depended completely on Earth for food supplies. More critically, studies revealed that Zephyrian farming methods were causing environmental disasters across their home worlds. Emperor Zixandra received reports that soil degradation and water contamination on major Zephyrian agricultural planets had reached critical levels. Crop failures were becoming common, and some worlds were facing complete ecological collapse. The Emperor's own scientists admitted that their traditional farming methods might destroy their civilization within a generation. The Emperor's advisors presented him with an unthinkable reality. The only hope for saving Zephyrian agricultural worlds was to adopt human symbiotic cultivation methods. The species they had conquered as primitive and inferior possessed the key to their survival. The political implications were staggering for an empire built on assumptions of technological and cultural superiority. Jake was working in his fields when a massive Zephyrian flagship landed directly in front of his farmhouse. The ship was larger than anything that had visited Earth before, gleaming with crystalline surfaces that reflected the afternoon sun like a giant jewel. Rex barked at the enormous vessel, but stayed close to Jake's side as alien soldiers formed honor guards around the landing area. Emperor Zixandra himself emerged from the ship, surrounded by his highest-ranking officials and scientific advisors. The Emperor stood nearly 10 feet tall, his crystalline exoskeleton more elaborate and colorful than any Zephyrian Jake had seen before. Ancient symbols were carved into his crystal skin, marking his status as the supreme ruler of the galaxy's most powerful empire. Jake watched the impressive procession approach his modest farmhouse, but he did not seem intimidated by the display of alien power. He simply waited on his front porch with Rex sitting calmly beside him, as if receiving visits from galactic emperors was a normal part of his daily routine. The Emperor's translator converted his complex vocalizations into English as he addressed Jake with a formality that seemed almost ceremonial. Emperor Zixandra acknowledged that the Zephyrian Empire had made a grave error in their assessment of human capabilities and formally requested Jake's assistance in saving their civilization. Jake listened quietly as the Emperor explained the desperate situation facing the Zephyrian worlds. Their agricultural systems were failing. Their people faced potential starvation, and their scientists believed that only human symbiotic cultivation technology could prevent the collapse of their entire empire. The Emperor admitted that they had conquered Earth believing humans were primitive, only to discover that humanity possessed scientific knowledge far beyond Zephyrian understanding. The Emperor offered Jake anything within the power of the Zephyrian Empire in exchange for his help. Advanced technology that could extend human lifespans, weapons that could make Earth unconquerable, territorial control over entire star systems, or wealth beyond imagination. Jake could name any price, and the Emperor would pay it to save his people. Jake was quiet for several minutes, looking out over his fields where the symbiotic organisms continued their invisible work of renewal and growth. Maria joined him on the porch, along with several other farmers who had become leaders in the symbiotic cultivation movement. Rex wandered among the alien officials, sniffing curiously at their crystal armor. When Jake finally spoke, his words were simple but carried implications that would reshape galactic politics. He told the Emperor that he did not want payment for sharing his great-grandfather's knowledge, but he did have conditions that must be met before he would help the Zephyrian Empire. Jake's first condition was the complete withdrawal of all Zephyrian military forces from Earth within 1 year. His second condition was the formal recognition of humanity as an independent and equal member of the galactic community, with full rights to self-governance and territorial integrity. His third condition was the establishment of a permanent treaty preventing any future attempts to conquer or subjugate Earth. The Emperor's compound eyes widened in surprise at Jake's demands. No conquered species had ever been granted independence from the Zephyrian Empire, much less been recognized as equals. Jake was asking for something that had never happened in the thousands of years of Zephyrian expansion across the galaxy. Jake explained his reasoning with the patience of someone who had spent his life working the land and thinking about the future. He said that his great-grandfather's research belonged to humanity and should benefit all people, not just those with the power to take it by force. He wanted to ensure that future generations of humans would be free to develop their own civilization, without interference from alien empires. The Emperor consulted with his advisors in their own language, their crystal forms reflecting light in complex patterns as they debated Jake's unprecedented demands. The discussion lasted for hours while Jake and his friends waited patiently on the farmhouse porch, occasionally offering refreshments to the alien delegation. Finally, Emperor Zixandra announced his decision. Faced with the choice between maintaining Zephyrian pride and saving his civilization, the Emperor chose survival. He agreed to all of Jake's conditions and authorized the immediate drafting of what would become known as the Treaty of Morrison Farm. The treaty was signed 3 days later. In Jake's barn, surrounded by corn and soybeans that represented the agricultural revolution that had brought the galaxy's most powerful empire to its knees. Jake Morrison, the quiet farmer from Nebraska, had accomplished something no military force had ever achieved. He had negotiated the independence of his entire species using nothing more than his great-grandfather's forgotten wisdom and his own determination to do what was right. Years later, as Ambassador Morrison addressed the Galactic Agricultural Council, he often thought about his great-grandfather's final words in the old research journals. D.R. William Morrison had written that the Earth remembers everything and that human job was simply to listen. Across 1,000 worlds were human and alien. Farmers now worked together using symbiotic cultivation. The Earth continued to remember and to provide.